This weekend saw some exciting announcements with Bitcoin City and the Bitcoin Volcano Bond coming to El Salvador. The bond is issued on the Liquid sidechain network, which begs the question that many of you may be asking, which is what is Liquid and how does it work? In today's video, we are going to answer just that. Let's jump in. Welcome back to another video. My name is Ian Major. I'm an entrepreneur, Bitcoin pleb, and all-around raging capitalist. And I've been waiting for some time now, actually, to do an overview video on Liquid. I've had it on my list for some time, and so the announcements we saw over the weekend are finally the impetus to make me wait no longer. But in today's video, we're going to unpack what happened, what was actually announced, and then we're going to dive into what is the Liquid sidechain. How does it work? And how can you get started if you are so interested? Now, today's video is really a part of a broader category of videos that I've done, which you can find linked in the description down below, which is kind of around DeFi on Bitcoin, or perhaps more aptly, just extending what Bitcoin can do, sort of on top of or adjacent to Bitcoin. And there are definitely pros and cons to Liquid that we will discuss in today's video, so you won't want to miss a thing. For those returning to the channel, welcome back, my friends and brethren. It is great, as always, to have you. And for those new to the channel, and I know there are many of you as well, about 80% of you currently watching are not currently subscribed. And so if you like this content, I invite you to consider subscribing and join us in our growing merry gang in cyberspace. I cover all manner of Bitcoin-related content, whether it's sort of news and analysis, wallet tutorials, mining Bitcoin, running your own node. You want it, I cover it. That is how this works. But with all that out of the way, let's jump in and quickly recap what happened in terms of the announcements over the weekend, and then we will get into Liquid. All right, so there was some exciting stuff happening. You had basically Bitcoin Week in El Salvador, so you probably, if you spend any time on Bitcoin Twitter, saw a number of folks either attending or talking about it. And so this culminated in an announcement that was made. I'm going to link this nice kind of series from BTC Gandalf, where they cover, some different videos of what happened. It's pretty cool to see, so I'd encourage you to check it out. But ultimately, the big announcement was that El Salvador will be building what it calls Bitcoin City. And so this is going to be a jurisdiction that has, no taxes. I think a VAT is how they're proposing to, fund some of the ongoing things once it actually happens. But, no income tax, no capital gains. Again, this is how President Bukele in El Salvador was describing this. And to help finance this and also finance some of the infrastructure that will go into supporting Bitcoin mining through renewable energy sources such as geothermal, the sort of volcano-powered Bitcoin mining rigs, they are going to be issuing the very first sovereign Bitcoin bond for $1 billion. And this is going to be issued on the Liquid network. And so I'm just going to read directly from this blog post from Blockstream. Today, the president of El Salvador and I have announced that they will be issuing a $1 billion US Bitcoin bond on the Liquid network. The $1 billion US raise will be split between a $500 million allocation of Bitcoin. So they'll be using, they'll basically be market buying $500 million in Bitcoin and a $500 million in infrastructure spend for building out energy and Bitcoin mining infrastructure in the region. El Salvador also aims to create a government securities law and grant a license to Bitfinex Securities to process the bond issuance. This could pave the way for other Liquid security tokens like the Blockstream mining note, etc., to be listed on a regulated El Salvadorian securities exchange. And there's also this note on a kind of special dividend at the end. So basically, after 5 years of lockup, the Bitcoin that is being purchased as part of this will start being sold and dispersed to bondholders. So it creates this very interesting additional kind of reward above and beyond the coupon rate on the bond. I think it's maybe 4.5 or 6.5% I'm forgetting right now, but very, very interesting stuff. And so this is the very first sovereign bond, sort of Bitcoin bond, where El Salvador is going to be raising funds in order to essentially buy Bitcoin or support infrastructure for the mining of Bitcoin. So I mean, just like take a step back and kind of pause and reflect what that means. This is an absolute sort of attack on, the softer currency that is the US dollar. You're borrowing dollars and buying Bitcoin and spending, on infrastructure that will support Bitcoin's continued growth and security. And so it is absolutely fascinating to see. Now, the players behind all of this include, of course, Blockstream. So Blockstream, Adam Back's company, has been around for a very long time, since the very early days. I mean, Adam Back's own work was, very much a contribution towards how Bitcoin came to be. And so Blockstream has been, one of the industry giants for quite some time, and they have a whole slew of Bitcoin-related kind of products, some of which we will hit on and touch on today. And so we'll definitely do future videos on this. I think there's going to be a lot of news that comes out both in the short and long term as this manifests. But for today's video, I want to use this as an opportunity to dive into Liquid. What actually is it? How does it work? What are some of the pros and cons, etc. So with that, let's jump in and take a look. All right, so let's start with what is Liquid. Liquid is a side chain to Bitcoin. And again, check out this entire playlist I have where at the beginning of it, I go through an overarching framework for some of the different categories and ways that folks and projects are extending the usefulness of what Bitcoin can do. But really going even to the white paper for the Liquid network and sidechain, which I will link in the description down below, the impetus for this is very much because of the fact that Bitcoin script is purposefully simplistic, right? It doesn't offer the kind of full expressiveness of smart contracts that you see in other kind of ecosystems. And that is by design to minimize the attack surface of this foundation level, which is the base Bitcoin protocol. But of course, there's always going to be demand for doing additional things with it, right? Borrowing against it or swapping it trustlessly with, another asset or whatever the case may be. And we'll get into some of the use cases. But that is kind of the basic motivation. How can we sort of extend what we can do with Bitcoin? And so as we can see, some of the kind of key benefits to the Liquid sidechain that they sort of market are, number one, more rapid transfers, so quicker transactions. And so you have 1 minute block times on Liquid. So every minute there's a new block. And finality is defined as 2 blocks. So 2 block confirmation times, where each block is a minute each. The main kind of use cases initially and currently for Liquid are really about trading. So think of, traders who obviously for whom speed is a virtue. And so the faster transaction times on Liquid is certainly a good thing for those types of market participants. But it also enables confidential transactions. We'll see an example of what that looks like. Which is quite helpful. So basically, by default, the transaction amounts in transactions that settle on the Liquid sidechain are confidential, and that's very nice because, of course, when you look at the Bitcoin kind of main chain, transaction amounts are not are publicly displayed. And the other big piece, of course, is being able to issue new assets, whether that's new tokens or new securities of some kind. And so this is why the issuance of a kind of Bitcoin backed bond, that is why something like Liquid is needed, because you can't issue that new type of tokenized asset using just Bitcoin script. So that is where this comes into play. And we can actually get a bit of a feel for the network by heading over to liquid.network. For those who are familiar with mempool.space, you'll see that it is essentially the kind of same type of interface, And so you can actually go to this drop down near the top left and toggle between the Bitcoin mainnet and the Liquid sidechain network. So it's cool that this is built into this sort of mempool interface. But as you can see, right, it's not a particularly active network, if we're being really kind of honest. But you can see that each of these 1 minute blocks has, maybe a transaction in it, 2 transactions, couple transactions, and you can see the amount of Bitcoin that is locked up for use in Liquid with the chart that you see in the middle on the right hand side. So 33, close to 3,400 LBTC, so that is liquid Bitcoin. So this is the derivative asset that has a 1-to-1 peg with Bitcoin, as we will discuss. So this is the main asset used and traded on the Liquid network. And so, that works out, currently to roughly 200-ish million US value. And so it's not small, but it's also not particularly large. So I do still think it's fairly early days for Liquid in terms of just the kind of overall usage. And again, right now it's really just sort of traders that are using it for the quicker transaction times and the confidential transactions, which is a nice feature. And you can see that example here. So this is just one of the recent blocks I picked. You can see here at the bottom, the words confidential are masking what would otherwise be the transaction amounts, which is nice. So fair enough, right? Largely to date, this has been used by traders. However, I suspect we will see, an increase in the amount of interest for Liquid in the form of, some of the new assets, such as this kind of tokenized Bitcoin bond. But let's talk about how it actually works, because I think, one, there's a lot to learn, but two, there's also a lot to be aware of, both in terms of pros and cons. Liquid operates with a two-way peg, and how that works can be conceptually illustrated with this screen grab from the Liquid white paper, which again, I will, it was a sidechain white paper. This was back in like 2014, so this is pretty dated, but the same structure is in play today. So basically you have the parent chain on the left, so this would be Bitcoin, and then you have the sidechain on the right. And so the core process is that we need to be able to verify that 1-to-1 peg. We need to basically ensure that the amount of LBTC that's going, sloshing around the Liquid sidechain is exactly equal to the amount of Bitcoin that has been locked up so that users can engage on the Liquid sidechain. So that has to be equal. So how do you do this? This is largely accomplished through what are called SPV proofs, or simplified payment verification proofs, which are essentially a collection of block headers along with evidence that shows that a certain output or a certain transaction you made was contained in one of those block headers. And hence, you're basically just saying that, like, look, I made this transaction. There was real proof of work that occurred to make this transaction happen. And I am the kind of owner of the output that I'm referring to, right, with this sort of proof. Like, that conceptually is what this is doing. And so how this works at a high level is you have SPV proofs on either side. So let's break that down a little bit more. So the peg-in process, as we can see in this diagram, so basically a user, you're the user, you have 1 Bitcoin, you send that 1 Bitcoin to a special peg-in address on the Bitcoin network. Now, that address is actually an 11 of 15 multi-sig controlled by the Liquid Federation. So this is where some of the kind of pros and cons start to come in. There is unfortunately a fair bit of trust, I think, involved in all of this. And so you send that Bitcoin to the multi-sig that's controlled by the Liquid Federation. And then after 100 confirmations, there's basically a confirmation period of 100 confirmations. And then this additional kind of contest period, the LBTC is issued on the Liquid network. And so some of you may look at that and say, well, that's a lot of confirmations. And I think that's right. But that sort of is what it is. Now, to actually do this, you have a number of options. So we will discuss this in just a bit. You could work through like an exchange. You could go on an exchange like Bitfinex and buy LBTC. And there you go, you have LBTC. You know, Bitfinex behind the scenes is doing the peg-in process, right? And you're sort of like not really seeing that. Or for folks who run their own liquid nodes, you're able to also do the peg-in process or validate the peg-in process yourself. For most users on Liquid, right, like they're not going to be running a Liquid node, and so all that kind of heavy lifting is sort of done behind the scenes, but it's important to at least be aware of what is actually happening. So that's the peg-in process. Send Bitcoin to the 11 to 15 multi-sig, that's controlled by these different Liquid Federation members. There is a cap on 15. I know Blockstream is working on this kind of dynamic federation update that would enable that number to increase. Because if you think about it, right, that's just you basically have to trust these entities, right, with your Bitcoin, and that they're going to keep that Bitcoin secure in this 11 of 15 multi-sig while you're off doing whatever it is you're doing on the Liquid sidechain. Again, the good news is you can at least verify what's happening and that there's no funny business occurring if you're running your own Liquid node. But again, a lot of people aren't going to be doing that, so just sort of be aware that there is trust required here, and that is one of the big trade-offs anytime you step off of the Bitcoin-based protocol, which is sort of fully trustless or as trust minimized as you will ever get. You're typically giving away some of that trust minimization as you go towards other sort of adjacent or layer 2s, etc. Now, the peg out process looks similar but has some additional nuance. So the Liquid, so basically only one of those functionaries can peg out the Bitcoin, because what's basically happening is they're going to burn some of their LBTC once you have demonstrated that SPV proof that, hey, this Bitcoin that I sent you, a little while ago to the multi-sig, like that was me. And so, I am entitled to that amount of BTC that corresponds with the amount of LBTC that I am submitting for this kind of peg out process. And so one of these 15 sort of entities will burn some of their LBTC and then release the corresponding amount of Bitcoin from that multi-sig. And so again, that kind of is what it is, right? We'll discuss some of the different sort of intermediaries and partners by which you can do this. But I think one important takeaway is to ensure that you know how you're going to peg out of Liquid before you peg in. And I would probably suggest, as I would with anything new that you're trying, to do so with with small amounts initially. Until you're comfortable. This is just a quick sort of rundown of the different federation members. And then again, it's a subset of these that comprise the 15 functionaries that manage that peg out process and who also are essentially doing the quote unquote mining. So there is no real mining in the sense of proof of work being done, but rather these 15 Liquid functionaries are essentially taking turns packaging up and signing blocks on the Liquid sidechain. So this is different from like a merged mine setup. For example, you have like the RSK sidechain, which is what Sovereign uses, for those of you who are familiar with Sovereign. And so RSK uses merge mining, which basically means that Bitcoin miners themselves are extending their hash rate to secure the sidechain. That is not what's happening here with the Liquid sidechain. And so in summary, you'll see that there are definitely some trade-offs here to be aware of. I've done a number of videos on Stacks, which is its own kind of standalone layer 1 blockchain that anchors into Bitcoin through this novel proof of transfer consensus protocol. And you kind of have like almost the opposite side of those trade-offs there in the Stacks world. With Liquid, you still have a derivative token of Bitcoin. Like LBTC is not Bitcoin, although you do have this verifiable one-to-one peg. But, essentially you have some of the additional rich functionality in Liquid that, of course, base protocol Bitcoin, doesn't have. And you're doing all of this in a way in which you don't have to kind of issue a brand new token. Because anytime you do that, of course, you have to wrestle with some pretty difficult challenges, like how do I get adoption? To do that, you probably have to market the token. And so that almost de facto puts a sort of team and face behind the token. And so there's a lot of kind of fair criticism, that proponents of Liquid may kind of say about other tokens. However, Stacks, albeit it has this kind of standalone gas token that's used for computation in its smart contracts, it is a much more kind of open network in the sense that there's not this kind of peg in, peg out process in which you do have to kind of trust entities. Anyone, in theory, anyone can become a federation member, but you kind of have to apply and be accepted, etc. Whereas with Stacks, anyone could be a miner, anyone could be a validator. So again, I'm just kind of making these comparisons to say that there is no perfect trade-off, right? And these are different efforts that have made different trade-offs. As I've made clear in that other video, I do think, at least as it currently stands, I would personally nod towards Stacks for having these superior trade-offs. But it remains to be seen. I know Blockstream is working towards making Liquid more trustless in the future, but we'll have to see how that actually plays out. And so finally, let's talk a little bit about how you can get started if you are so curious to check some of this out. In future videos, I will probably pick apart some of these and do deeper tutorials on, for example, the Blockstream Green wallet, or how to kind of procure some LBTC, etc. But for now, I just want to step through a couple of these summaries. Again, I will link all of these resources in the description down below. A lot of this I'm pulling from Blockstream's very helpful kind of FAQ. And so I'll put that in the description. But you can see here a number of the integrations. What's nice is that peer-to-peer marketplaces like Bisq support the exchange of LBTC. So that's nice, right? Like you could go and buy LBTC in Bisq, or you could sell it. And you could do that, you could sell your LBTC for Bitcoin if you can find a willing trading partner on Bisq. And so this is actually one way to get around the necessity of going through the kind of peg out process. You can simply do one of these kind of cross asset swaps. You'll also see a couple exchanges on here, Bitfinex being the most well known. You also have BTS. And so zeroing in specifically on just kind of the acquiring process, as we just mentioned, there's a couple different options for swapping your Bitcoin for LBTC. You can buy it outright with fiat in what's called Aqua, which is a mobile wallet that Blockstream has built. You can also borrow LBTC against your Bitcoin in the lend section of HODL HODL, which is another peer-to-peer sort of marketplace like Bisq. That has lending and borrowing as well, which is very cool. And then again, as I mentioned, if you run your own Liquid node, you can process a peg-in yourself. Although again, I would imagine most users would probably not do that. In terms of then how to secure your Liquid assets, there's a number of options available. There's Aqua, which operates on iOS mobile. There's Blockstream Green, which is probably the best sort of just overall intro wallet for any of this. This operates both on mobile and desktop. I will very likely do a tutorial of this in the future, but this would basically support not just LBTC, but any asset that is issued on the Liquid sidechain. You also have Blockstream Jade, which is a hardware wallet, and a few other options here. And then again, let's say that you've done your business on the Liquid sidechain, you want to peg out. These are some of the platforms available to convert that LBTC to BTC for you. So again, Bitfinex is going to be the most well-known here, but there's also SideSwap and a few other options here, as you can see. And so you have that option to go through one of these entities to convert from LBTC to native Bitcoin, or you can do one of those atomic swaps peer-to-peer that we were discussing earlier. So there you go. Hopefully that demystifies the process, what kind of sort of sidechain Liquid is, how it works with the PEG process, and some of the different sort of ways to get started in terms of how to acquire it, store it, etc. Let's go ahead now and conclude this video. All right, friends, there you have it. We covered a lot of ground as we always do. Just as a quick recap, we took a look at some of the announcements that unfolded over this past weekend with El Salvador to be the very first sovereign to issue a bond backed by Bitcoin, which is going to be issued and tokenized on the Liquid sidechain network. And we went in today into how the Liquid sidechain actually works. We talked about the peg in, peg out process. And we talked about some of the different entities that are supporting this process, and importantly, the pros and cons, right? I think in its current form, Liquid is certainly interesting in that it enables these additional use cases, creating new assets, etc. However, there are a number of steps at which you need to trust functionaries that are managing the peg in and peg out process and who are quite literally securing the Bitcoin that you've locked up as you peg into this process. Now, I haven't done full justice to some of the different checks and balances that they have, right? And so I would encourage you to check out some of the resources that I'm providing in the description down below. But net, where I land with this is it's very interesting. I think it requires a little bit too much trust for me personally relative to some of the other alternatives. But it is the case that being built by Blockstream, you have some of the very best in the business who are involved in this. And with now this momentum from the kind of Bitcoin bond, I think we will see a lot of really interesting stuff on this in the future. But let me know, what do you think? Let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments down below. Again, I will likely do videos in the future that dive deeper into some of what we discussed today. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave this here. I hope you found this valuable and useful. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave this here. As always, my friends, every sat counts. And until next time, I'll see you then.